Just to get a glimpse beyond the illusion by TinyButFierce. Chapter 3. The WHIH logo danced across the screen. Images of world events scrolled within it as the colours streamed together and subtracted into the corner. The blonde reporter smiled at the camera with a vulture-like glint in her eye. Good evening. My name is Christine Everhart. Today's special report is an investigation into the remarks made a few weeks ago by billionaire and Iron Man Tony Stark. She turned to face a different camera as a photo of Tony wearing a three-piece suit and his classic sunglasses appeared on the screen next to her. For the next 15 minutes of the broadcast, she elaborated on Tony's history, as if no one watching knew anything about him. Finally, the clip from SI's recent press conference was shown. Tony leaned against the podium and looked into the camera. In the past year or so, I have been training a replacement for myself. While he is not mine biologically, he has levels of intellect that rival my own and compassion that I never had. There is no one better that I would name my heir. He has my entire confidence, and I'm sure he will earn yours. The clip faded into the background, and Christine was on screen again. Smiling at the camera, she continued. Due to the investigative nature of WHIH news, we have successfully identified the new Stark heir. Coming soon, after this commercial break. The commercials began to run, and a certain group of people stared daggers at the screen hanging in their penthouse living room. Pepper Potts, Peter Parker, and Tony Stark all sat in silence while a commercial advertising Mini Coopers played in the background. Tony cleared his throat. Hey, did anyone else notice how they edited out my statement about please don't look for him and he's still in school? Pepper glared at the TV. We noticed. Tony looked around at the people in the room. This is all a bunch of crap. Look at this terrible suspense. How can people watch this? Friday, how many people are watching this? Friday paused for a second. 20 million viewers, boss. Peter made a choking noise. Tony patted him on the back. Aw, that's less than a quarter of the amount who watch the Super Bowl every year. Before Pepper could reprimand Tony about traumatizing Peter any more, the elevator to the penthouse dinged. Looking back towards the entrance, the three were greeted to the sight of Rhodey walking in. Tony's gaze landed on the braces wrapped around the Colonel's legs, and his eyes hardened with guilt. Rhodey, noticing the look, raised his eyebrow at Tony. They had already had the guilt complex conversation before, and he did not want to have to repeat it. Peter looked up and waved at the Colonel. Rhodey smiled in response. I heard what was happening, and I came here as fast as I could. There's a crowd building up outside the tower. Tony groaned. Great. Rhodey patted Tony on the shoulder and sat down on the chair next to the couch where the other three were spread out. Glancing at the TV, now advertising some medicine with too many side effects, Rhodey settled in on the chair and turned to look at Peter. Have they said who they think you are yet, or are they just talking about Tony incessantly? Peter smiled at the Colonel. Talking about Tony incessantly. Rhodey nodded and started to grin. Have they talked about the MIT noodle incident? Tony's eyes widened comically, and he started to panic. Absolutely not. Rhodey, no. Pepper sighed and smiled when Peter sat up straighter and looked Rhodey with a gleam in his eye. Please tell. The Colonel smiled at Peter and winked at Tony, who immediately covered his face. Well, so Tony here decided that WHIH music started to chime and the group quietened. Rhodey threw in a quick, "Tell you later," as they all focused on the TV once again. Christine Everhart showed up on the screen with her usual grin. Welcome back. Last we left off, we covered the background of Tony Stark. Now is when we focus on his heir. Christine turned to face the other camera, and a picture of Midtown appeared next to her. Tony swore under his breath. Pepper shot a warning glance at her fiancé. Future spottings of Tony Stark and his driver during various occasions at the Midtown School of Science and Technology were able to discern the identity of his heir. A picture of none other than Peter Parker appeared on the screen. It was blurry and obviously taken from a distance. It showed the teen getting into one of the cars that Happy liked to drive. All 4 people in the penthouse froze. In this photo, you can clearly see that the teenager known as Peter Parker getting into a car belonging to Stark Industries and its fleet of drivers. When questioned, his classmates described him as smart, solitary, and, he also has an internship at Stark Industries. The SI logo appeared under the photo of Peter. We sent an undercover agent to Stark Industries on the trail of the internship. When we got in contact with the person in charge of the program, we were told in no uncertain terms that the internship was for college students only. So how did an orphan teen from Queens just happen to get an internship in a program that doesn't accept high schoolers? The answer is quite obvious. It's a cover-up. The image is changed to the old Forbes magazine cover that was taken with Obadiah Stane and Tony when he was about to take over the company. Next to the cover was a better photo of Peter, obviously taken from the school newspaper's coverage of the science team. Seeing the photo with Obadiah, Tony tensed up. Pepper sent a glance towards Tony and then looked over at Peter. The teen was staring at the TV, but it didn't look like he was focusing. He was frozen, lots of thoughts running through his head. Pepper nudged Tony and tilted her head towards Peter. Seeing the distress on his mentee's face, Tony stood up. All right, I'm done watching this. They're bringing out the photos of me in my 20s, and nothing good can come of that. Peter, we're going down to the lab. Peter jerked his eyes away from the screen. I thought we had to watch this. Tony laughed. Nope, we do not need to watch this. Come on, you don't have to subject yourself to this. Lab, let's go. Peter stood up from the couch and followed Tony out of the room. Pepper and Rhodey were left. Rhodey sighed and looked over at Pepper. Kid doesn't deserve this. The CEO shook her head and took her phone out. Notifications popped up and Pepper growled under her breath. Rhodey looked over at her in concern. What's up? The legal team just got back to me. Apparently, New York has no laws that prohibit releasing information about a minor. There's just a lot of ethical problems rather than anything we can actually do legally. The Colonel frowned. What can we do? Pepper looked up with a shark-like grin. We can make sure that WHIH news never gets to come to an SI or Avengers event ever again. Works for me. The two went quiet as they continued to watch the program all the way to the end. Pepper stood up when it finished and the TV turned off. I'm sorry to leave you, but I have to go meet with PR. Rhodey waved it off and slowly stood up from where he was sitting. No worries, I'll go check on the 2 geniuses, make sure they haven't blown up anything yet. The 2 parted and Rhodey made his way to the lab. Stepping inside, he was greeted to the sight of Tony and Peter bent over one of the Iron Man suits. Peter was working with the wiring inside it, while Tony looked on, his eyes revealing a dash of pride at the sight. Rhodey cleared his throat and the 2 looked up at him simultaneously and smiled. Tony put his hand on Peter's shoulder and told him to keep working. The billionaire walked over towards his best friend and ushered them into the hallway. The smile dropped off his face. How'd the rest of it go? Let's just say that Everhart basically revealed everything about him, except the Spider-Man thing. Oh, everyone also thinks he's your biological son. I figured. What did Pepper say? She went down to the PR department. You should probably join her. Tony glanced around the door and looked in at Peter, whose tongue was clenched between his teeth in concentration. Rhodey looked in as well and smirked. I can see why they would think you're related. I can look after the kid. You go down to PR. Tony sighed and clasped Rhodey's shoulder. Thanks. No problem. Tony walked down the hallway towards the elevator, and Rhodey went over to Peter. The team looked up with concern in his eyes, but Rhodey quickly dispelled it with a sentence that he uttered. All right. Let me tell you about the noodle incident.